And please let's welcome Emmanuel Dupuy, President of Institute for European Perspective and Security. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, before we begin our conversation, I would like to play a soundbite from Radosław Sikorski, Foreign Minister, after the meeting of EU member states of foreign ministers. Let's take a listen.
Moments ago, I announced a decision of the Polish government that, in light of the involvement of the Russian state in hybrid warfare efforts against the European Union and Poland, we will be placing restrictions on the movement of Russian diplomats across Poland. The Russian embassy will receive a note on that matter soon. The restrictions will cover both the embassy and the consular staff of the Russian Federation in Poland. Russian diplomats will be allowed to travel solely in the Mazovsha region, and consuls will be permitted to travel exclusively in provinces that they have offices in. This will apply to the diplomatic staff, with the ambassador being the sole exception. Other countries already have similar regulations in place, and we expect others to follow suit.
So Poland wants to introduce restrictions on the movement of Russian diplomats. How do you think this is going to be taken by Russia?
Well, of course, Russia will use this and to fuel its propaganda, saying that the problem does not come from him, but from those who are trying to deter or to put pressure on Russia. This decision has been made by other countries. For example, France has expelled not less than 36 members of the Russian embassy from the beginning of the conflict more than 2 years ago. There's been significant signals of hybrid warfare, of asymmetrical threats on a certain number of NATO bases in Norway, near the Svalbard archipel, for example. And I think that Poland is taking the right decision in order to take in consideration that there is more pressure on the high north of NATO when there is more solidarity amongst all of the nations bordering now Russia.
Right now, NATO is debating the use of its weapons the use of its weapons by Ukrainians in Russia. So the question is whether should we take seriously Russia's threats that there will be some sort of a reaction from the Kremlin, or are those just empty threats which we're already used to?
Well, I think the threats are there, unfortunately, putting pressure on Ukraine since the 24th of February of 2022. I don't see why there is still a restriction or caveat on the use of weapons, whether they are coming from the West or whether they are produced by Ukraine, taking consideration that, for example, the co-belligerents, and I'm using this with cautiously, naming North Korea, Iran, or even China, which are fueling and giving weapons to Russia, which is using it against Ukraine. So I don't see where the caveats still stand. To be very broad and very synthetical, Dmitry Kuleba, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, when he had a press conference a few days ago, three days ago, with Antony Blinken, said, you cannot ask Ukraine to fight with one hand tied in the back. At one point, there is to be the conscious that if we are to deliver more material, the 1,800,000 shield ammunition, and now 2 million rounds of ammunition that Peter Pavel, the Prime Minister of Czech Republic, and Kaja Kallas, the Prime Minister of Estonia, has managed to managed to put in capacity to be brought on the front by the next month. If these materials are to be used against Russia, they can be used on the Russian territory, whether it's the front in Belgorod to give a bit of ease for the Kharkiv population, or most likely in Crimea. I do have in mind that a certain number of countries are not saying anything else. A few hours ago, the Minister of Defense of Denmark said that it was time for the Europeans to be cautious, that if we want to defeat or at least deter Russia, we have to make sure that the weapons are used not only to defend Ukraine, but to prevent aggression of Russia.
Mm-hmm. And majority of experts, political analysts agree with you, but there are some who are saying this may be taken as provocation and Russia may act on it. And we all know that Russia likes provocations, and they take every single one of them. Do you think they will act on it?
What type of precaution or actions can Russia take to try to destroy the Occidental material that we are delivering in Ukraine? This is the case with the Caesar cannons. This is the case with the Patriot anti-ballistic system. This is the case with the German Iris-T, which are already on the Ukrainian soil. So they will be targeting more this material. So what, if I may say so? This is already the case. If Russia wants to try to hit or strike a potential ballistic attack or ballistic launch coming from the Polish territory or the Romanian territory, if this is done in Romanian air or land territory as well as any NATO state, then Russia is in war with NATO. That provocation will lead to the inclusion of a new front, a horizontal front.
Right. Now, I'd like to ask you about, well, reluctantly, as a matter of fact, I'd like to ask you about something that Dmitry Medvedev posted lately on the X platform. Dmitry Medvedev, a former president of Russia, man of many talents. Well, he stated today that if the conflict in Ukraine escalates into a direct conflict between Russia and NATO, Warsaw will get its share of radioactive ash. How would you comment on that?
Well, we all know that ballistic nuclear missiles are already in the Kaliningrad entity, in the Kaliningrad Oblast, since this anomaly is a reality since 1991. We already know that a certain number of Occidental, Western, NATO, British, American, and French nuclear capacity are in a certain number of countries, not yet in Poland. Nevertheless, Donald Tusk and President Duda are discussing about this. At least President Duda mentioned it when he made his trip in Washington a few weeks ago. Obviously, if we are to speak, and of course no one wants this, of a nuclear war, it will strike and it will hit all of the European countries, and nevertheless, it would also have an effect. And if ashes were to fall, nuclear ashes were to fall in using the Dmitry Medvedev narrative in Poland, they will also fall in Russian territory in the Kaliningrad Oblast.
Now, in the weeks that Vladimir Putin fired Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, Russia's FSB security, they're finding out that there was a series of high-level corruption cases against a deputy minister and department heads. Now, we shouldn't be surprised that corruption is taking place in Russia. However, is this showing that Putin is losing control over his own people?
No, I think Putin is retaking control of the Minister of Defense. The firing, or at least the change of Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, shifting to the National Security Council and replacing Nicolas Patrushev, as well as the arrival of Andrei Belousov at Minister of Defense, showcases the fact that he wants to have a more tighter grip on the use of its military capacity, taking in consideration that there is therefore a weakness of Russia. Experts, or some experts from the western part of the Atlantic Ocean, do take in consideration that at this rhythm, 30% of the federal expenditures of Russia, more or less an augmentation of 70% of the defense budget, now waiting till 8% of the global GDP of Russia. Therefore, 106 billion of euros each year spent on defense since the last 2 years and entering in the third year. Therefore, 300 billion of euros spent on defense. Russia cannot will have a serious economical capacity or serious economical difficulties in the future. Some argue that it can last 18 to 24 months, and this is why the nomination of economists, a technocratic economists, willing to have more, let's say, more pragmatical use of the money that Russia has the capacity to use, is, of course, giving the impression that the Russian president wants to show that that he is capable of maintaining the war for a long period of time, and that he is resilient the Russian economy is resilient to the fact that more or less it had entered into a war economy. Russia has money still. Russia has a number of capacity. Before getting kicked out of the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu called for mobilization of more than 300. Volodymyr Zelensky thinks by the next June there will be 400 new Russians in capacity to come to the front. But Russia has serious economical drawbacks, and this is why the nomination and the shift of governance in the Minister of Defense is to be looked with very cautious attention.
Right, so the Kremlin might be looking for an alternative ending to this conflict in Ukraine. Therefore, I'd like to ask you about today's news about EU being ready to hold peace talks with Russia after the peace conference in Switzerland. What's your take on that?
Well, the European position said that it will be under the condition of Ukraine, and it will be at the own and sole benefit of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So nothing has really changed about this. What is changing is that there is a new mindset based on the fact that Volodymyr Zelensky, who has been defending courageously Ukraine, is not the only one who is defending Ukraine. And there needs to be more political consensus, a sort of war cabinet in the way that Benjamin Netanyahu has created after the 7th of October Hamas attack, being more political consensus, where bridging Gennady Trukhanov, the mayor of Odessa, Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, or the former President Poroshenko, or the former Prime Minister Tymoshenko. Now, actually, Europe is asking that there is more political consensus on the fact that we must continue to aid Ukraine, that Ukraine is willing to commit, of course, taking consideration that we have to work very rapidly and consciously for the integration of Ukraine inside the European Union. But there has to be a perspective of peace. There has to be a capacity to get at one point to bring a possible horizon to the end of this conflict. If we listen to what Vladimir Putin is putting on the table, that will mean that we have a frozen conflict. That means that the territories that have been won by Russia, more or less 18% of the Ukrainian territories, are no longer Ukrainians. And of course, we have rightfully the capacity to understand that this is not acceptable for the Ukrainians. But at one point, what the European Union is saying, what the External European Action Service and its still High Representative Joseph Borrell is asking, is to have a perspective at one point to see that we need to rebuild Ukraine. We need to bring it to the perspective of the integration of the European Union. And as the 5th of July NATO conference or summit will happen in Washington, to have a perspective to guarantee the security of the country.
Right. So peace, but not at all cost. Emmanuel Dupuy, President of the Institute for European Perspective and Security, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.